Human soldier carried the wounded enemy queen for 30 miles. Now she wants him as her mate. The war between humans and the Valric's empire had been raging for 7 brutal years. Both sides had lost cities, armies, and countless lives. Hatred ran deep, and the propaganda on both sides painted the other as little more than monsters. Private Daniel Cross had been fighting on the front lines for 3 of those years. He'd seen his share of blood and mud, but nothing could prepare him for the day he found her. It was during the Battle of Karthvale. The human forces had launched an offensive into Valric's territory, and the clash had turned the once green valley into a smoking graveyard. Daniel had been separated from his unit after an artillery barrage collapsed the trench line. He was making his way through the wreckage when he spotted movement in the corner of his eye. There, half buried under rubble and scorched earth, was a tall, imposing figure in battle-worn crimson armor, the color of Valric's royalty. Blood trickled from the gaps in her plating, her breathing ragged. Daniel raised his rifle instinctively, but then froze. Her helmet had been knocked aside, revealing a pale, angular face framed by silvery hair. Her golden eyes, dimmed with pain, locked onto him. "You're human," she rasped, her voice trembling with both weakness and disbelief. Daniel hesitated. Every bit of training screamed at him to finish her. She was the enemy, a queen no less, whose orders had likely killed thousands of his kind. But there was something in her expression, not hatred, not arrogance, just exhaustion. She was dying. Without thinking, he slung his rifle, knelt beside her, and started clearing the debris. She hissed in pain but didn't resist. "Why?" she whispered as he lifted her onto his back. Daniel didn't have an answer. He only knew he couldn't leave someone, even an enemy, to die like that. "You'll make it," he muttered, more to himself than to her. And so began the 30-mile trek back to the neutral zone. Her armor made her heavier than anyone he'd ever carried, and every step was a battle. They crossed shattered villages, waded through knee-deep mud, and hid from patrols of both sides. Sometimes she drifted in and out of consciousness, mumbling words in her native tongue. Other times, she asked questions. "You risk much for me," she said once, her voice a little stronger. Daniel grunted. "Guess I'm not very good at this war thing." A faint smirk touched her lips. "Perhaps you are too good for it." By the time they reached the neutral zone, a no-man's land patrolled by humanitarian medics, Daniel was staggering. His legs felt like lead, and his lungs burned. But when he finally laid her down on a stretcher, her hand caught his wrist. "I am Queen Athyra of Valrix," she said, her golden eyes now burning with something fierce. "I owe you my life." He nodded, already turning to leave. "Just try not to kill any more of my people, your majesty." But the war wasn't over, and they both returned to their sides. Daniel didn't think he'd see her again. He was wrong. 6 months later, at a tentative peace conference, Daniel, now recovering from a leg wound, was assigned to guard the human delegation. He nearly dropped his rifle when he saw her enter the chamber. No armor this time, only a flowing dark robe lined with silver, her crown resting lightly on her head. The other human soldiers tensed, but her gaze swept past generals and diplomats until it locked onto him. A slow, knowing smile curved her lips. When the session broke, she crossed the room without hesitation. "You," she said softly, as if they were alone. "I have not forgotten." Daniel scratched the back of his neck awkwardly, glad to see her still breathing. She studied him for a moment before speaking the words that made his heart stutter. "In my culture, a life debt of this magnitude is sacred. You carried me from death. That makes you my chosen." Daniel blinked. "Your chosen what?" "My mate," she said simply, as if declaring the weather. "It is the highest honor I can bestow. My council thinks it politically foolish. I do not care." Daniel's mind raced. Look, I didn't do it for her. I know, she interrupted, her gaze unyielding. That is why you are worthy. The rest of the conference was a blur. Rumors spread like wildfire. The enemy queen wanting human mate. Diplomats muttered about scandal and cultural insult. The Valric's delegation was split between outrage and intrigue. For Daniel, it was surreal. He had gone from carrying her through mud and gunfire to being courted publicly by one of the most powerful women in the galaxy. Ephyra wasn't subtle about her intentions. She visited him daily during the talks, asking about human customs, laughing at his dry humor, and sometimes slipping in remarks that made him blush. One evening, under the watchful eyes of both their guards, she said quietly, "You could unite our peoples, not as soldier and queen, but as Daniel and Ephyra." He wanted to argue. It was crazy, impossible. But when he looked into her golden eyes, he saw the same stubborn fire that had carried her through the war, and the same trust she had placed in him that day in the ruins. The peace treaty was signed 2 weeks later, and when Ephyra returned to her empire, Daniel received an official invitation, not as a soldier, but as her guest. Her last words before boarding her ship still echoed in his mind. "You carried me for 30 miles, Daniel Cross. Now let me carry you for the rest of your life."